I want to bring in our very own Melody Hom, who had an interesting chat on the coronavirus with former Secretary of Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano. Melody, good chat here.
Yeah, Brian. Janet has a very illustrious career as a public servant prior to joining that role under President Obama from 2009 to 2013. She was the governor of Arizona, so she has a good pulse of how leadership is demonstrated in times of crises. And she actually was really central, and she had a pivotal role in 2009 with that H1N1 pandemic. And she was widely actually credited for mitigating the potential ramifications that could have led our country to perhaps something like we're experiencing now. But she did make a few distinctions between, of course, the H1N1 and the coronavirus. Here's what she had to say.
So the first case in the United States was in April of '09. By July, they had identified a vaccine and it had been through testing. By August, they were in mass manufacture. By October, we had a national vaccine campaign underway. In contrast, COVID-19 is a new animal. It's a new type of virus, and in a way, our scientists are having to start from scratch in order to develop a vaccine, and that's why you're hearing time estimates like a year to 18 months. I think those are realistic time estimates, and I also think, by the way, that we will not really be through the COVID-19 pandemic period until we indeed have a vaccine.
Napolitano's sentiment there is really echoed by a lot of the investment community that we speak with. I want to point out that her current role is serving as the head of the UC system, really overseeing 285,000 students across 10 campuses, of course, 5 medical centers. So in some ways, she is running a large operation, right? So she had to make that difficult decision, of course, to close campuses down. She was speaking to me from her home, and she has a small staff that operates out of there. I want to point out that she was actually intending to step down from that role in August of this year. I did speak to her, and she made it sound like there is some flexibility there because, of course, that wouldn't necessarily be the best move to be leaving amid a pandemic.
Yeah, I would imagine that would be pretty disruptive as president of that University of California system. I know Dr. Anthony Fauci said last night he's hoping to get schools back up and running in the fall. Did Janet Napolitano have anything to say about that?
Yes, she made it very clear that they are on track and they're intending to, of course, open in the fall semester if the climate allows. I do want to say, though, that there's been a lot of chatter, right, across the university system about reimbursing tuition for a lot of disgruntled students, and also for some students who perhaps do not think the ROI is there for this kind of system. Maybe more so than the students, the parents who are paying those bills. But I think in this case, I asked Janet Napolitano about that very issue, and she said they are not reimbursing tuition, but they are kind of refunding some of the dining and housing stipends, especially depending on the financial aid packages that those students were first awarded. So there is some flexibility there. And of course, there was a really interesting conversation we had about whether these students should be TikTok stars during their free time, because she was saying you shouldn't let a crisis go to waste. And so there's a lot of added pressure. Alexis, I know you have several children who are thinking about this process as well. And if you anticipate how competitive this landscape already is, with none of the academics or SAT scores that are kind of being put to the front of the line, you're going to have to supplement your application with some interesting things and ways that you spent your time during COVID-19.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good. Sorry, because Melody knows I've got 3 kids and my oldest is a senior and looking at going to college in the fall. There's a lot of things that won't happen this spring, like prom and graduation. We're hoping that, the DOE here in New York City can make something happen for these kids maybe later in the summer. But you're right, time to get creative, right?
Exactly. It's not this pressure to get that 1,600 anymore, right? It's like, you better build a startup, you better find that vaccine, who knows?
There you go. Get back to basics. Melody, thanks a lot.
Our Melody Hom had the chance to sit down with former governor of Arizona, Janet Napolitano. Of course, she also served as the Homeland Security Secretary under President Obama. She talked about the current administration's performance.
one of the problems we've seen in this pandemic is the White House, and by the White House, I mean really the president, has been all over the map. First it was a little thing, then it was a hoax, and then it was a national emergency. And then people are supposed to rush out and get prescriptions for chloroquine, which is a medication that hasn't been tested against COVID-19, but is used for other conditions. The lack of coordination of the federal response, the management of the federal stockpile, the implementation of the Defense Production Act, clear, consistent, persistent messaging from the leadership is really what the country needs. Empower people with knowledge and facts.
Yeah, and of course, that's the general sense that we're getting, right, Julie, that people are looking to leaders. That's why folks like Governor Cuomo, Governor Newsom are sort of being elevated to this status that we haven't seen, at least in my lifetime, of a governor being treated with that kind of respect. Or, there are viral things on Twitter right now, Cuomo-sexual, just for this fascination that people have with their local leaders. And as you mentioned, Napolitano was actually the governor of Arizona. And then when she was at the White House, she was on the task force in charge of mitigating the H1N1 flu and actually did a very good job at doing that. Of course, the flu is very different from the coronavirus, but overall, it was a very interesting and wide-ranging conversation about how she essentially believes that, unfortunately, we can't look to the White House for any sort of leadership, and we have to really be celebrating the local leaders in our communities.
Mel, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right, and it's not just retirement accounts that are getting impacted by the coronavirus slowdown. Colleges and universities across the country are also trying to figure out what to do with their admissions process as well as funding as we continue to see this impacting sector upon sector. For more on that, I want to get to Melody Hom, who has the latest, who was able to speak with Janet Napolitano as well, the University of California president and former Secretary of Homeland Security under Obama. And Melody, what did she have to say?
Yeah, Zach, and as we know, the UC system is perhaps the largest in the country in terms of operating budget. They have about $40 billion. So she's essentially running a corporation here with a conglomerate of 10 schools. And she called the coronavirus one of those threats that is low incidence and high consequence that could have been mitigated and did not have to balloon to this level. But now that the college system and university system have to deal with this, she made the move exactly 1 week ago to show, quote, maximum flexibility, which essentially means that they'll ease some admission requirements. They won't require SAT or ACT scores. They'll accept pass-fail for a lot of high school seniors who are actually in classes right now who aren't getting letter grades. And she said overall, she's able to show some resilience, and she hopes that students can do the same. Here's what she had to say.
Well, we do something called holistic admissions at the University of California. We look at 14 different factors. We try to look at the whole student, not just grades and test scores. And as I said, we've already suspended the test requirement. But one of the things we look at is how a student did use their time. And so if some students figure out a way to use TikTok or some other technology and use this time and want to put that in their application, it'll be one of the factors we look at. That's for sure. And there's a lot of creativity going on out there, no doubt. And there's the saying, never let a crisis go to waste. And so to the extent that high school and community college students show that they did not let the crisis go to waste, sure, we'll take that into account.
And that was specifically in response to me asking her, should students become influencers right now? Should their goal be to really up their following, especially if those grades and SAT scores don't count? I don't know about you, Zach, but the anxiety that I was feeling was even off the roof because it's not even kind of tangible metrics that they can aspire to, right? Now they should be creating startups. They should be creating apps to really set them apart from the lot. So it was a very interesting conversation. And I think that it just shows how much more pressure there is for this incoming group of students.
Terrifying to think that would be an criteria, that it would be how many influencers. That could be a negative, honestly, in my opinion, depending on what it looks like. But Melody Hom, bringing us the latest on the admissions front. Thank you so much for that.
So at this time of people going to school from home, a lot of people are questioning the value of that education, what they're spending. Is it worth it? Should they be getting money back? Melody Hahn, you just had an interview with the University of California's president, Janet Napolitano, on how they're thinking through some of these issues. What did she say?
Yeah, and Jen, as you may be aware, the UC system actually has an operating budget of around $40 billion, and Janet Napolitano is overseeing 10 different schools, 5 different research labs. It's a huge conglomerate of sorts. Exactly a week ago, the UC system actually decided to freeze tuition, but also decided to eliminate SAT scores as necessary, as well as letter grades for certain required courses, as many high schools have actually transitioned to pass-fail methods just because it's so hard to determine what grade someone deserves if they're only on the computer or only completing assignments a couple hours a day. She had some interesting insights on the education system at large right now.
We're holding tuition steady. We are not increasing tuition for our current students and don't have plans to do that. But in the meantime, if students had to leave their housing and dining contracts, we've allowed them to withdraw and given refunds for those. So, and then our financial aid offices are very busy working with students. Many of them have to have their financial aid packages recalculated. And of course, when the federal money for students starts to flow, and we know how that's supposed to work, that also needs to go into the calculation. And so we're going to try to do as much as we can for our students so they can remain at university, remain making progress toward their degrees.
Napolitano did announce last year that she would be stepping down from this role in August of 2020. I did ask her in our interview if those plans have changed, and she had a long pause and said, yes, perhaps, because of course the timing would pretty much be disastrous if she had to leave. Her original plans were to actually join UC Berkeley's staff and faculty. So if you think about it, overall, this has created a huge ripple effect, and we saw some tone-deaf comments even from the dean of Tisch at NYU saying, no refunds, and she had that crazy music video. So I think overall, the communication level that folks are expecting from their educators after doling out tens of thousands of dollars is quite high. And one other comment she did say was she actually encourages people to be using sites like TikTok and be creating content to not let the crisis go to waste. So that's added pressure for some of these people who are trying to apply without having to depend on the typical metrics that are normally looked at.
So interesting. Talking to parents of college students, they are really focused on the cost and what's happening. And then talking to the actual students, I've heard a lot of controversy over this whole pass-fail stuff. Students feel like, well, I was doing well in that class. I want to get more than that. Or some of them are happy. But it's just a fascinating topic here, and a great interview. Melody Hahn out in California.